Roughly half an hour, maybe 35 minutes, something like that. Hare Krishna. Jai Mother Nakunja Seva. So, we're in volume 4, chapter 30, and Prabhupada's at John Lennon's place, Tittenhurst Park, and basically just different incidents which occurred there have been described, all sorts of different happenings. And yes, so we'll carry on. Let's just find out. Oh, here we are. George Harrison was speaking and saying some very nice things about Srila Prabhupada. It's a shame he didn't get into it more deeply, but anyway. He was addicted to cigarettes. Poor old George. Oh, really? Wow. Oh, she's not here. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Lalita Kund, if you're online anyway. We'll thank her. Right, okay, so Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Niravishesha Shunyavadi Paschachadesha Tarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. There's some really interesting things here coming up. The Daily Sketch, it's just one of the London daily papers, reported Krishna people dine out at John and Yoko's place. A photograph showed the devotees seated out of doors taking prasadam. Okay, so this is now from the article. Lunchtime at Tittenhurst Park, stately home of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and some of the Lennon's house guests take their places in yesterday's sunshine. The picnickers are followers of the Indian Swami, His Divine Grace, Abhay Charan Bhaktivedanta. They have adopted the ways of the East, from their clothes and shaven heads right down to the Indian curry they eat with their fingers, which is all rather out of character for a place like Tittenhurst Park, which cost John £150,000. Boy, that's not even a giveaway. I can't imagine how many tens of millions it had been now, but plenty. And covers 60 acres of most exclusive Sunning Hill near Royal Ascot Racecourse. Unquote. Prabhupada and his people and John and Yoko and theirs made an odd combination. 2 days after Prabhupada's arrival at Tittenhurst, John and Yoko had flown to Canada to perform with the Plastic Ono Band at Toronto's rock and roll revival at Varsity Stadium. In October, John and Yoko had recorded Wedding Album and begun working on a film, Rock and Roll Circus. And John had recorded Cold Turkey. And if any of you are familiar with that, if you're not, don't become. I tell you, it's just so gross and out of it. I mean, it's just hopeless, actually. It's just hopeless. All right, so yes, although John was usually shy, the devotees working at the main house found him open-hearted and generous with his possessions. He invited the devotees to stay permanently at Tittenhurst and farm. Whatever he had, he said, he would share with them. One day Yoko asked Yamuna if a devotee couple could stand in for her and John on stage at a London theatre. She and John had previously appeared there dressed in only a burlap bag. Burlap bag means brown sack, typical sack, yeah. Right. And was supposed to make another appearance. But Yoko thought perhaps a devotee couple could take their place. The crowd, she said, might never know the difference. And even if they did, I guess completely covered, maybe something like that. Even if they did know the difference, it would be a hilarious publicity stunt for the devotees. Politely declining, Yamuna explained why devotees could never do such a thing. When she told Prabhupada, he was adamant. None of his disciples would go. For days afterward, he condemned the sensuality. John invited Prabhupada to the manor to hear his recent recording of Cold Turkey. Oh my gosh, what? Not very good taste, shall we say. She and John had although such a song held little interest for Prabhupada, John whimsically wanted him to hear it. Taking the opportunity to preach to the great man of the world, Prabhupada went. Within John's main sitting room, Prabhupada sat on the couch before the fireplace. The tape was ready on the large 16-track machine that had recorded it. And as Prabhupada sat patiently, John began to work the controls. But the machine wouldn't work. John began cursing under his breath, turning knobs and pushing buttons. Although only Purushottam had accompanied Prabhupada, 2 other devotees hid outside beneath the windows, listening. When they peeked in and saw John struggling with the machine, they began giggling in the shadows. "Oh," Prabhupada said, "so your machine is not working. Well, never mind. We've also made some recording, and we'd like to play this music for your pleasure." John resigned himself to listening to Prabhupada singing, and Prabhupada was saved from the cold turkey. You're not kidding. You're just not kidding. You're really just not kidding at all. Prabhupada kept his visit short. As he was leaving, he saw on the wall, framed, life-size photos of John and Yoko naked. He also saw black and white silhouettes of a man and woman in various positions of sexual intercourse. On returning to his room, he commented, "It is not good for us to continue staying here." He asked Mukunda to find him an apartment in London. The Berry Place renovations were still incomplete, and Prabhupada said he preferred to be in the city so that he could oversee the work. The natural setting of Tittenhurst was pleasant, but Prabhupada's host's way of life and his were incompatible. One day, John and Yoko, dressed in black, came to visit Prabhupada, acknowledging him to be a great yogi with mystic power. They asked him to use his powers to arrange with Krishna that they be reunited after death. Prabhupada was disappointed. "This is not my business," he said. "Krishna provides you with life, and he takes it away in the form of death. It is impossible that you can be united after death. When you go back home, back to Godhead, you can be united with Krishna. But husband and wife, this is simply a mundane relationship. It ends with the body at the time of death. You cannot pick up this kind of relationship again after death." At one end of the estate lived a bricklayer and his wife in a small, neglected Georgian house, hired by John to build a recording studio on the property. The bricklayer had only recently moved to Tittenhurst. A tough, burly man, he never spoke to the devotees until one day he asked several of them if they believed in ghosts. "Oh yes," Kulashekar said. "Prabhupada says there are ghosts." "I don't believe," the bricklayer said. "My wife is having dreams, but I don't believe in ghosts." The bricklayer's wife revealed that both she and her husband had been hearing, quote unquote, something at night. Last night, they had gone running to John Lennon's house, terrified, complaining of sounds, chains rattling, boot heels pounding, and the noise of something, quote unquote, like a body being dragged across the floor. The bricklayer had seen his wife violently shaken by the shoulders, although no one else was there. When the devotees told Prabhupada, he said, "You tell John Lennon that if he wants, we can get rid of these ghosts." Mukunda relayed the message, but Tom had already invited his friend, a white witch, to come and exorcise the ghost. The warlock, the white witch, the warlock, you get these people in England, visited the bricklayer's cottage, and a few devotees tagged along. Over the fireplace in the main room, they found a carving of a person with a ghost coming out of his forehead, and on the opposite wall, mahogany runes. "These are ancient witch runes," the warlock said, shaking his head. "I can't do anything here." When John asked the devotees to try their method, Prabhupada directed them. At the bricklayer's cottage, they should sprinkle water offered to Krishna in the doorways, blow conch shells, and then have kirtan. A group of devotees went, and Kulashekar led the kirtan. After half an hour of chanting, Kulashekar felt a great release of pressure within the room, and the kirtan became ecstatic. The devotees returned to their engagements, assuring John that the ghosts would not return, and the bricklayer and his wife moved in again. The next morning, Prabhupada passed the old cottage on his walk. "So, how is the ghost?" he asked. "No news, Prabhupada," Kulashekar replied. The following morning, Prabhupada again asked, "How is the ghost? Would they like to have him back?" Years ago in India, Prabhupada said, when he was running his chemical business, he had detected ghosts in the building at night. "What did you do?" one of the devotees asked. "I simply chanted Hare Krishna and the ghosts would go away." Prabhupada then opened his eyes wide and gestured with both hands, mimicking the frightened workers in the plant who had come running to him. "Babuji, Babuji, there is ghost, there is ghost." The devotees laughed. "Actually," Prabhupada said, "there are many ghosts here, especially over by the stable areas. They are attached to this place, but they will not harm you if you just chant Hare Krishna." Prabhupada was anxious to leave Tittenhurst, and by late October, some of the devotees had moved to Berry Place. Prabhupada no longer had any business at Tittenhurst. Mr. Lennon was an influential person who had seemed interested in Krishna, but now there was no point in Prabhupada staying on at the estate. Yoko and her ex-husband, Dan, now John's manager, were also pressing John to get rid of the devotees. Dan complained that the devotees were trying to take over the place. The devotees, on the other hand, complained to John that Dan and Yoko were misrepresenting them. On one side were Dan and Yoko, on the other the devotees. John was in the middle. He had to choose. John told Mukunda that as far as he was concerned, he got along fine with the devotees, but the people around him were having difficulty. He would give the devotees a couple more weeks to move to their new temple in the city. The devotees were already in the process of moving to Berry Place, and Mukunda had found an apartment for Prabhupada a short drive from the temple. In a few days, everything would be ready for Prabhupada to move. On the day Prabhupada left Tittenhurst, he stopped at his car and said, "I want to say goodbye to a few friends first." He then took a last walk through the grounds, giving careful attention to the trees, sometimes touching their leaves, just as on his morning walks. Then he left. The next day, a severe storm swept through the Tittenhurst estate, breaking windows and uprooting trees. November the 3rd, 1969, Prabhupada moved into his furnished apartment on Baker Street, a 10-minute drive from the Berry Place temple. After 2 months in London, he was anxious to see his temple open, and Shamsunda was working hard, although progressing slowly. For the temple's interior, Shamsunda had an artistic concept taken from photographs he had seen of the Ajanta caves, South Indian temples with walls and ceilings of carved stone. Sure. His inspiration was to produce a similar effect using California redwood he and Mukunda had shipped to England a year ago. On first hearing the plans, Prabhupada had asked, why make it so artistic? But Shamsundar had been so set on the idea that Prabhupada had permitted him. With the ceiling partly finished, there was no turning back. But I was there, I was there for a few years. Wasn't that artistic? In fact, it wasn't very artistic. Shamsundar toiled day and night, yet each day the temple design seemed to grow more elaborate, with the walls and floor fashioned of solid redwood, and the ceiling lined with redwood arches. Shamsundar took great care to see that each piece fit exactly into place. As Shamsundar inched along, devotees joked that the room looked like an upside-down boat. But Prabhupada encouraged him, telling him it was very beautiful. Prabhupada often allowed his disciples to work as they liked. He reasoned that they were raising the money and could spend it in Krishna's service as they pleased. He also did not care to interfere in every detail of a disciple's service, especially when the disciple was strong-headed and had ideas that were not harmful or obstructive. All Prabhupada's disciples were ultimately under his absolute decision, but he was often lenient, 80% lenient, he would sometimes say. Shamsundar particularly thrived on having his own big projects. He had arranged for the Mantra Rock dance in San Francisco, built the first Ratha Yatra carts, established a friendship with George Harrison, and now he was designing a temple. Prabhupada allowed it watchfully, like a father. Consulting the Vedic calendar, Prabhupada chose December 14th for the temple opening celebration. And despite predictions from Shamsundar and others that the deadline would be impossible to meet, Prabhupada ordered invitations printed immediately. The devotees had tremendous work to do and little time. Not only did they have the temple to complete, but also Prabhupada's quarters on the second floor and the kitchen in the basement. Faced with their tight deadline, they worked harder. I remember when, and of course I wasn't there at that time, but in 73, when George Harrison gave the Bhaktivedanta manna, and Prabhupada was coming, and they had to fix it up a lot, really a lot. And some of the devotees, the temple commander, if you've been to Vrindavan, you might know him, Rajashekar, an elderly brahmachari. Anyway, he was temple commander. And we went out there one day, for some reason, I forget why, early in the morning, during the morning program. But there's literally nobody in the morning program because everyone was working to get the place ready. And Rajashekar, the temple commander, we went up, a few of us went up to the brahmachari rooms upstairs, and we're just sort of hanging out with some of the devotees. And Rajashekar, the temple commander, came in and he said, I've been up the entire night. I'm going to lie down. He lay down for about 1 minute. And someone came in and said, Rajashekar, what are you doing? You're in Maya. And he had to get up, and away he went. And they were so busy that Shamsundar, I think Shamsundar was there actually, he would not allow the devotees to chant their rounds. If anyone was caught chanting their rounds, they were really chastised. Oh yeah. Not a particularly wonderful idea. We don't do that. But he was that sort of person. As Prabhupada was anxious about the temple opening, he was also anxious about publishing the first volume of Krishna, but he had no money. According to printers' estimates, the book would cost about $19,000. Prabhupada told Shamsundar to ask his friend George for a donation. Shamsundar, who had always been careful not to ask George for money, was hesitant. But Prabhupada insisted, and Shamsundar gave in. Okay, just a sec. George agreed but regretted it afterward. You know what happened? It's not actually here. But what happened, at least Shamsundar told us the story, that Shamsundar went to George's place and a storm started. And right at sort of the peak of the storm, Shamsundar asked George for, I think, $20,000. And George was like, what? But at that moment, there was a massive flash of lightning, and all the electricity went off for a few seconds, and then came back on. And George told Shamsundar, I guess that was a message from Krishna. And so he gave the money. George agreed but regretted it afterward. Then Shamsundar began to feel sorry. After all, he hadn't really wanted to ask George, and George hadn't really wanted to be asked. When Prabhupada heard of this, he invited George to see him. George told Prabhupada that every day people were asking him for his money. But when Prabhupada explained the importance of the Krishna book and how George's donation would be devotional service to Krishna, George dismissed his regrets. He also agreed to write a foreword to the volume, which, you may all have read. It's very famous and it's pretty nice. It's really nice. George, I didn't really think I was qualified to write the foreword to Prabhupada's book. But one way of looking at it is, because I'm known, it would help. But from the other point of view, it could really hinder, because not everyone wants to listen or to believe what I say. There are a lot of people who would be put off just because I'm saying it. I mean, if I picked up a book on Krishna, if I picked up a book on Krishna and the foreword was written by Frank Zappa or somebody like that, I would think, God, maybe I don't want to know about it. Frank Zappa, you heard of Frank Zappa? Anyway, he died a long time ago, but he was crazy. I mean, so many of these people are really crazy. So I thought that although he asked me, maybe Prabhupada didn't really want me to write the foreword. But it was one of those things I couldn't get out of. Everybody had their minds made up. You're writing the foreword and that's it. So I just did it. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Oh, well, any comments or questions? Yes.
Maharaj, I was just wondering, all of the insect jivas and the plant jivas who live with our spiritual masters, what kind of karma or bhakti do they have that they get that opportunity?
Well, all of the creatures and beings that you associate with, that any of the devotees associate with, it's not just an accident. Yeah. Something happened in the past. And, possibly, maybe not so much, otherwise they would have taken birth as humans and, had a real opportunity to become practicing devotees. But it's something. Yeah, definitely they did something. And as a result, they're, like just for example, the grass growing around here. The devotees are walking on the grass. Yeah. And the flowers that are being used for this and that. Yeah. So they've all done some probably Krishna conscious activity, little bit. And now they're getting a bit further opportunity.
What about jivas like those little white insects who live on Tulsi? Because on the one hand they eat her, which isn't good for her, but on the other hand they live with a pure devotee.
Yeah, well, but they're aggressors. So we have to protect her. She's a pure devotee. I mean, she is just one of the greatest. So yes, preferably without using like chemicals and, all that sort of stuff. We should try to find some organic, more natural way of getting rid of them.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Any words of wisdom? Lakshminath Prabhu, words of wisdom? Comment? Okay. Oh, what? There. Here.
Maharaj, Prabhupada mentions it's impossible for John and Yoko to reunite after death. But I think I've heard a description in Srimad Bhagavatam that if like two people, they commit sinful activities together, they'll suffer together afterlife in the lower planetary systems.
I don't know if I read that, but, Prabhupada does say that if a couple are really dedicated to each other, then it's possible it may happen, but otherwise people are just brought together like twigs or branches in a river, sort of thrown together as the river is moving. So people are thrown together as this material world is moving, then they're thrown apart. So it would definitely appear to be extremely unusual, extremely unlikely. Anyway, if you can find that place, I'd be interested to see it.
Yeah, it was in a lecture. It was on Srimad Bhagavatam. The speaker was speaking. It might have been like a joke or something. Somebody had asked if they would be with their partner after life. Yeah.
Well, we will probably all be together because Prabhupada said we'll have another ISKCON. in the spiritual world. So the possibility exists. So we got to really learn to get on well with each other, because we're going to be together, sure. We're going to be together. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you, Lakshminath Prabhu. Very good.